All right then, so we come to consideration of the attributes of God. The attributes of God. The attributes of God. Now, if you follow then the flow of our structure, we started by looking generally at supernatural beings, and then we looked at the existence of God, and then we looked at the knowability of God. Please make sure you define these terms very, very carefully. In theology, precise definitions is everything, because one word can be used generally and it has a particular meaning, but in technical theological language, it means something very specific. Yeah. So it's how you define our. The other day we were talking to Josh about something. What is it about? There's something we're talking about. It was about, did Christ go to hell or what? Yeah. And then I said it all depends on what you mean by hell there. Yeah. If by hell you simply mean generally the world of the dead, because the world of the dead is sometimes called death. Hell, the state of death. But if you mean by hell the eternal place of the torment of the wicked, then see how that can determine what answer comes. Yeah, so always in theology, define terms clearly. So use the word knowledge. Don't assume that word knowledge means the ordinary thing. Well, you've got to start there. Okay? You've got to start there. But then you've got to pay attention to the fact that in many instances, words do take a specific technical meaning and be seized of those meanings as well. That's one of the first things that Mwalimu Kip taught us when we go to college. Define your terms clearly. All right. So, talking about definition of terms. So we talked about the knowability of God, and now we're talking about the being of God. Right? God as He is. And we said we discussed two things here. The attributes of God and God as Trinity. So talking about definitions, let's begin by defining the word attributes. So we know what we're talking about. So what is an attribute? What is an attribute?
Attribute refers to the character.
The character, something. Yeah, that could be one way of understanding the word attribute. Yeah. So attribute can be looked at as being the character of something or someone. Yeah. Though that word character itself is not adequate, because character can be essential or acquired. Yeah, so it's a good word, generally speaking, but more has to be said, yes?
A defining feature.
A defining feature. A defining, yeah, the word feature is important. Defining is also important because when you talk about a defining feature, you're being much more fundamental in that the features you have in view are what makes that thing what it is. That's what a defining feature is. In other words, without that thing would not be that thing. So when you say, for example, that breathing is a defining feature of all living things. Without breathing, there can't be no living thing. Yeah. You take that away, that thing simply is not there. Okay? Yeah. So yeah, attributes can be looked at as in terms of a defining feature, characteristic, a character characteristic. Okay? Which other word could we use to define the word attribute? A quality that is essential to something. Now here's how this defined that an attribute is a quality or a feature, or even let's use the word character, that is essential to something being what it is, without which that thing would not be what it is. So that's what an attribute in our context is going to be. Especially. Yeah. So when we speak about the attributes of God, we are going to be looking at those qualities, those features, those characteristics that belong to God as God, by which He is God, without which He won't be God, okay? So that's what we're looking at in terms of the attributes of God. So that's the first thing then that we want to say. Sometimes they're called the perfections of God. Okay. So attributes of God are those qualities, properties, perfections, features, characteristics which belong to Him necessarily as expressive of His divine nature. That's what an attribute is. Now I want to clarify some things regarding how we look at the attributes of God, arising even from the definition that we have adopted. The attributes of God ought not to be looked at as being something distinct from God or attached to God. No. You can't look at them like that. That there is God and then there are His attributes. As if you can look at God apart from His attributes. No, you can't look at those attributes like that. Like we said, it is by those attributes that God is what He is. Now the second wrong view of looking at the attributes of God is, and this is the more common mistake that people make, is they look at the attributes of God as if they are constituent parts of God. Yeah. They are what composes God. In other words, you bring this, you bring that, you bring that, you bring that, and then together they make up. They're not things that compose God or constitute God. Now, what that means also is that these attributes cannot be looked at apart from one another. Because God is not composited. God is not this plus this plus this plus this plus this. God is this, all at once. Yeah? And either He is all of those or He is none of those. That's how we look at the attributes of God. Here's how one theologian has described the relationships of the attributes of God. He says that the attributes of God are like beams which express the fullness of His essence. They are like beams which express the fullness of His essence. So that in each of those attributes you find God in the fullest. Okay? Yeah. Beams, B-E-A-M. Beams. Miale. Yeah. Beams. You know, like beams of light from the sun. Oh, yeah. So they are like beams which express the fullness of His essence. So the divine essence is one and indivisible. There is one God. He is essentially one being. So there's only one divine essence. Now that divine essence is expressed, but that divine essence is not expressed in only one way. It is expressed in numerous ways. And each of those ways in which the full divine essence is expressed has that divine essence in full. Okay, not part of the divine essence. So when we speak, for example, about the holiness of God, the holiness of God expresses the fullness of who God is. Okay? So that all that God is and everything that God is answers to that description of holy. If you're talking about God being just, justice expresses the fullness of his essence. So that even when you are talking about the holiness of God, that holiness is also just. And the justice of God is also holy. And when you're speaking about the grace of God as an attribute of God, that grace is at the same time holy and just. Yeah. So in each of these attributes, you find all that is true of God expressed fully. An attribute of God doesn't express one aspect of God. No. In each attribute, the fullness of the essence, of the divine essence is expressed. That's why this scholar likens attributes to beams which express the fullness of his essence. So in the holiness of God is the fullness of the essence of God. In the justice of God is the fullness of the essence of God. And so on and so forth. So, however many those attributes are, each of them is the fullest expression of everything that God is. And so they become, for lack of a better way to express various ways in which God is appreciated by us. Yeah. Because he has expressed himself in that way. And having expressed himself in that way, then we can appreciate and interact with him. So the attributes of God are not things that God has, they are what God is. Attributes of God are not things that God has, they are what God is. They are who God is. So God, you don't just say that God has wisdom. God is wisdom. God doesn't just have holiness. God is holiness. And another thing that must be said then is that God is no more one of those attributes than he is the other. God is no more one of those than he is another. Of course, this is an impossibility, but humanly speaking, if a single one of those attributes would not be there, God would not be there. You see what I mean? Yeah. So that's how we go to look at those attributes. Now, why is it important to carefully define and describe this matter of God's attributes like that? It is important because a mistake that has been made at various times by various people is to emphasize certain attributes of God above others or more than others. Okay? Now I do know that the data of scripture that's available lends itself to us having better appreciation and understanding of some attributes more than others. No doubt about that. Okay? No doubt also that in terms of theological considerations, we can use words. We can use words which may infer that certain attributes are more fundamental, and that's fine. But conceptually, we've got to know that none of those attributes is more useful than the others. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to communicate to us here. So some people have always elevated one attribute at the expense of another. Or, even worse, some have, in order to affirm an attribute of God, they deny another. So let me give you an example that is very common here. Everybody would like to talk about God being love, isn't it? And God does not just have love. We are told God is love. Now, everybody wants to talk about that, and that's okay. But they can't reconcile, or they refuse to reconcile the idea of God being love and at the same time God being angry enough with sinners to throw them in hell. They find that the love of God is inconsistent with the wrath of God. Okay? So they say a loving God, a God who is love, cannot create hell. So they've done. They've created a hard and fast distinction or separation between those two. In fact, they've brought those two into conflict. If this is true of God, this can't be true. So who are you to say that of God, that if this is true of Him, this can't be true? If your little mind is struggling to understand something, please admit that you are a man and not God, and wonder at the beauty and the majesty of God, rather than to deny things that are clearly revealed in the Bible about God in order to affirm others. Yeah. And so there is an evangelism today that downplays the matter of God's wrath. Don't tell sinners that God is angry with them. No. Just go and tell them God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. But the Bible tells us clearly, God is angry with sinners every day. Okay? So that's why it's important to affirm this and to define this clearly and to put everything in its right perspective so that you know God is all of those or is none of those. Now let me give you an example, even between how those two extremes, supposedly extremes, relate. So God is love, and God is angry with sin, and God is holy. Now these are attributes of God. Now, if God has wrath, if God is wrath, that wrath must be holy, right? If God is love, that love also must be holy. So think of it this way. A God who is love, a God who is love, but who cares nothing about evil. Can that God be holy? Can it be described as holy? No. The holiness of God is described, I think, in Habakkuk 1:13 as God being of such purer eyes as to not be able to look at sin, so that God cannot stand sin. That expresses His holiness. That is expressive of His holiness. So a God who is only love, and because He is only love, cares nothing about sin, winces at it, or winks at it. Winks at it, just ignores it. Cannot be described as holy. He can interact with sin. Yeah? You see how looking at those things like that causes problems?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a...
Just a minute, let me just finish this thought. Yeah. So, what you have then is a God who is holy must react to sin in a certain way, right? Because it's of purer eyes than to behold sin. So whenever he finds sin, he must act against it. Now, why is God acting like that against sin? Because he's holy. So the holiness of God encountering sin must act in a particular way. Right? Holiness acts in a particular way in the presence of sin. So how does it act? It acts in judgment. Yeah. When holiness meets sin, judgment ensues. And that's why I've always insisted on this way of defining the wrath of God. And people ought not to think of God's wrath as something of like our own wrath, which is irrational and just an outburst of, No, don't look at God's wrath like that. God's wrath is, in fact, the holiness of God acting as it should in the presence of sin. That's all it is. When the holiness of God is reacting or acting properly in the presence of sin, that's what we call the wrath of God. Okay? And that is why God will not love and in loving deny his holiness. No, his love will be in keeping with his holiness. Yeah. So his holiness must act in a certain way towards sin. And when that happens, then you're looking at the wrath of God. So the wrath of God, as I should define it for you sometime, either later today or early tomorrow, is God's just and holy recoil against sin and his unbending determination to punish it whenever he sees it. That's the wrath of God. Now what brings that about? The holiness of God. So see, those two things are like, you can't spread them. Where there is holiness, there will be wrath. Yeah. So, yes, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was very much confused with the verse from John 3:16.
Yes.
Because it says that for God so loved the world. That's why he gave us begotten Son.
Yes.
So I was wondering how is God lovable that compared by examining what Jesus Christ went through under the cross.
Yeah. In fact, that brings me to the second thought I wanted to express regarding the relationship of the attributes and how they're essential to each other. How do you explain the cross? How do you explain Calvary? When you look at the cross of Christ, what do you see? Of course, John 3:16, you see love. For God so loved the world that he gave. So obviously, love is displayed there. But is that all you see there at the cross? What else do you see?
That is right.
Now, at the cross, we're thinking about the attributes of God now. Yeah. So at the cross, we see the attribute of God's love. Yeah, God's love expressed in the giving of his Son, the salvation of sinners. Yeah, that we see that. What else do you see at the cross? And we're talking about the attributes of God.
You cannot let sin, his anger.
Yeah. The cross is in fact an expression of the wrath of God, isn't it? Yeah. You see how love and wrath are expressed in the cross? Yeah. So God is not going to somehow express his love by ignoring his wrath, which means to ignore his holiness. So at the cross, God demonstrates his love. And the way that he demonstrates his love is by punishing sin.
Another dilemma comes. When we go to Isaiah, we see that God said he was pleased by bruising his Son.
Yeah. That doesn't present a dilemma. Why is it a dilemma? Well, I see what I can see why you think it's a dilemma. That God is pleased to punish his Son because of the outcome of it. It's the outcome of that punishing that makes it pleasing. But at least now you begin to see how these attributes are intertwined, and that you cannot have one at the expense of the other. Very often in Scripture, they are acting together. Even those that seem to be very incompatible, like love and wrath. Yeah. So the psalmist describes it this way: that justice and mercy. Is it justice and mercy are the foundations of this throne? Righteousness. What I want to say is this: that at the cross, justice and love kiss one another. God loves, but he loves justly. He loves justly. So you cannot put these attributes of God. Now this is important for our evangelism. Because again, as we look at these attributes of God, we want to be very careful to show how they relate with the gospel. Yeah. And I'm simply telling you that how you conceive of the relationships of the attributes of God is going to seriously determine the soundness of the evangelistic methodology, even the content of the evangelism. And if you have a wrong view of the relationships of the attributes, you will fall for the same thing that others have fallen for, which is that the whole one attribute of God as being against another. And thereby essential aspects of the gospel are impugned. Sorry. Okay? Yeah. Because if you preach the gospel of love apart from wrath, That's a cheap gospel. Okay? And that completely obliterates the need for the death of Christ. If God is not angry with sin, if there is no necessity in God to decisively punish sin, the death of Christ makes no sense. That's why when we come to the matter of the atonement of Christ, and we look at this in the second next unit on salvation, and we ask the question, was the atonement necessary? Was it necessary for the Son of God to come, take up human nature, and then suffer and die for us to be saved? Was there no other way to do it? And we say, yeah, there was no other way. And there was no other way, not because God is compelled by forces outside of himself to take certain courses of action, but there was no other way because God, being God, cannot act in ways that contradict him, or ways by which he contradicts himself. Yeah. And that is why when God chooses to save sinners, he has to save them in a way that is consistent with everything that he is. He is simply not going to silence his wrath and holiness and then play up his love and then save on that basis. No, he is going to express his love in a manner that does not injure his justice, does not injure his wrath and his holiness. In other words, the only way that God is going to save sinners is by full payment being made for their sins. Now, who could have done that? No human being could have made full payment on account of sin. Only God could have done it. Animals couldn't do it, human beings couldn't do it. So it required someone who is of a divine nature to satisfy the injured requirements of God. Okay? So the only way that humankind could be saved is by God himself coming and God making the satisfaction himself and doing it as a man. So the incarnation itself is necessitated by the harmony of the attributes. Yeah. So this is a massive thing. It's a massive thing. Yeah. So if you drop the ball at this point, then you have you run the risk of misunderstanding the gospel at very serious junctures. Yeah. That's why I've taken the time to explain what the attributes of God are and how we are to look at them, not as being parts that compose God or being additions to God, or as one as being capable of functioning apart from others. No, they are who God is. God is at the same time holy, at the same time just, at the same time love, at the same time wrath, at the same time grace, at the same time mercy, and is all of those at once. And all of those are part of each other. Okay? So that's how we have to look at the attributes of God. Any question at that point? So far? Okay. In timekeeper, you help me to keep time. If 10 minutes before time, let me know, so I begin to wind up. Now, having described or having defined what the attributes of God are, I think the next thing to do is to give you what, again, theologians have termed as the classification of attributes. The classification of attributes, or the categories of God's attributes. We'll look at each individual attribute, not all of them, but some of them. But before that, let's look at some general categories. And the attributes of God have been looked at, or have been categorized into two major categories. Have been divided or arranged into two major categories. Okay? Now, one of those categories is what theologians refer to as the incommunicable attributes. Let's take AWT to mean attributes. So there are what we call the incommunicable attributes of God. And then we have what we call the communicable attributes. Now, I already made an allusion to this distinction yesterday. So Can someone remind us of what we said about those? So what are the incommunicable attributes of God?
Right.
Yes.
I think those attributes which God possesses but cannot share with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are those attributes, those qualities that belong to God and God alone, and He does not share them with any of His creatures. Yes.
You also said that we may get big words like those ones we look at.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we divide it like this. This being the root. To communicate means to transfer. It could be to transfer tangible commodities or to transfer information or to transfer a disease. So we talk about communicable diseases. Yeah. So to communicate means to transfer or to share. Once you put this prefix, you cancel out that. So you're not sharing. Yeah. So thank you for that again. So incommunicable attributes of God are those attributes of God which are not shareable. Yeah. They belong to Him and Him alone. He does not share them with His creatures. So we call them incommunicable attributes. Okay? And then when we talk about communicable attributes, of course this is not easy to understand. There are those attributes which are shareable. Yeah. They belong to God. They are essential to God being God. But God in His grace has been pleased to share them with some of His creatures. Right? Yeah, so we call them communicable attributes. Now, something more has to be said about how you define communicable. Because again, like I said, our definition has to be very precise so that they are not misunderstood. Now, when we talk about the communicable attributes of God, of course we are saying there are those attributes that God has been pleased to share with us, yet, even those attributes that God has been pleased to share with us, He does not share them with us fully. Got to add that. Yeah. So we are made in the image of God, the Bible says, but we are not made God. We can be like God. We are like God. We have a resemblance, but we are not a replication of Him. So God does not simply replicate those attributes in us in terms of they are in us in exactly the same way that they are in Him. No, He doesn't do that. Yeah. He shares them with us, yet He shares them only up to a point. Yeah. So when we're looking at those attributes of God which we possess, we possess them in a limited way. And that is not just because of sin. Even before we sinned. Yeah. So for example, part of our being made in the image of God means that we possess knowledge. We possess knowledge. And God possesses knowledge. God is wise. All right? But do we possess knowledge in the same way that God does? No, we don't. First of all, we do not know as much as God does. God knows a lot more than we do. So in that very superficial way, we know, but we know nowhere near how God knows. But the more fundamental thing is this, that we do not know like God knows. It's not just that we don't know as much as He knows, we do not know like He knows. Because all of our knowledge is acquired. God's knowledge is not acquired. It is intrinsic to Him. So when we're going to talk about the omniscience of God, we'll mention some technical terms. We'll distinguish what we call God's necessary knowledge. Okay? And then God's knowledge that arises out of the determination of His will. So there are things that God knows are rising out of the exercise of His will. There's that way of looking at God's knowledge, and then there's the knowledge of God that is necessary to Him. Now the difference is simply this: God simply knows because He's God. God knows just because He's God. That knowledge is necessary to Him. He is all eyes. Yes, the Bible uses a phraseology like that. But then God also knows in another way. He knows by dint of His decree. He has decreed all things that happen. Right? And by the virtue of having decreed all that happens, He knows all things. Yes, there are those two levels. Now, we don't know like that. So the difference between our knowledge and God's knowledge is not just a matter of degree or amount. No, it's qualitative. We don't know like God knows. God's knowledge is unlike ours. And so, that's what we're saying then, that even these attributes of God that He communicates with His rational creatures, they're not communicated fully. He only shares them up to a point. And in your definition, you must include that. If you don't, I'll only give you a quarter of a mark. That's a humbling thing. That's the whole point of it. Yeah. It's a humbling thing. God is so gracious as to share something of Himself with us. And that sometimes makes us arrogant. That we can be like Him, brings ideas in our minds as if we can be Him. That ontological gap remains. It's unabridgeable. You cannot bridge it. God remains God and remain. So you've got to say that as well. So there are communicable attributes, those that God shares with us, but only up to a point. And then there are incommunicable attributes, those that belong to Him and Him alone. Anything to say regarding those definitions? What do you think? You're not sure? You're not sure? You're not sure? You know what she's asking? Are we small gods? Yeah. Did I help you at all in the hermeneutics class? I didn't help you at all. It's a question of interpretation, isn't it? You're not small gods. We are not gods at all. But we can? Can we save? Of course we can save, and of course we can't save. If someone is drowning at sea, of course you can go save them. If the house is burning down and someone is unaware, you can go save them. But that's as much as you can do. You see what I mean? Thank you. So when you talk about salvation in the sense that you think you are, of course you can't do that. Save yourself from this crooked and perverse generation. Then it alludes that we can save ourselves. Again, it's a matter of interpretation. Now listen, we are not God. I think you're referring to that place where Jesus is quoting an Old Testament text in John 10. And he has actually claimed to be God's son. And they're taking big issue, great exception to that. And so he says, if he called them gods to whom the word of the Lord came. Yeah? Why are you offended that I call myself son? Are you referring to that? Well, we are told we are called small gods. Yeah, because it is the two texts that I'm familiar with, actually three, where anything akin to that is said is Christ in John 10. And Christ is obviously quoting from Psalm 82, I think. Yeah? Ye are gods, but you all die as men. No, that text. Yeah. So that's the second one. And then the other one, of course, is in the Exodus passage. In God's interaction with Moses, when God tells Moses, I am sending you as a God to Pharaoh. And Aaron will be your prophet. Yeah. Now, please, we'll not go into interpreting all those texts now. But I can tell you this. Yeah? all those texts, if you interpret them properly, are not intended to teach that we are small gods. They are not. The best that I can give you that might help you is something of the Psalm 82 passage, because I think it's fundamental to what Christ is saying in John 10. The word for God there is the word El, okay, or Elohim, because it's plural, isn't it? Yeah. And the word Elohim comes from the word El, which means strength or powerful. All right? So that is why you realize, you know, all these are the Hebrew names of God that we are familiar with. It begins with an El. El Shaddai, El Gibor, El this. So the idea of strength and might sort of tends to precede the other ones. He is all that he is in a mighty way. Yeah. So the word El generally in the Hebrew refers to strength. Yeah. And so because of that, you notice that even angels are sometimes referred to that way. Because they are strong. Yeah. So you find that word, which is sometimes, that word El is used in reference sometimes to angels. They are called mighty ones. Because they are strong ones. Does that make them gods? No, it doesn't. It's just that the root word can be used in those ways. Because the essential meaning of it is just strength. Yeah. El refers to strength, power. So to the extent that angels possess a lot of power, they are called mighty ones. And in the Hebrew, that would be like El. Yeah. Now, in the text of Psalm 82, if you look at, you're now compelling me to do things I didn't plan to, but I'll do it because I think it's important. Now that we're talking about the attributes of God. So Psalm 82. So let's just read it. Yeah. That's sometimes the mistake. You rush to the verse. Let's look at the context. So look at verse 1. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of that gods, he holds judgment. You notice the word God appears there. Yeah? So there is God and there is gods. So God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of that God, he holds judgment. So here is God enthroned as judge, right? And what is God saying? So God is challenging these so-called gods. He's challenging the so-called gods. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Now you begin to get a sense of what those gods are. Yeah? So who do you think are being addressed here as gods, amongst whom God is now standing to challenge? Who are these? Okay, let's keep reading. Verse 3. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right to the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Now, whose role is it to do this thing that God is challenging these so-called gods to do? Whose role is it normally? Please, you know this. No. It is God challenging these gods. Now, the people call gods here, and God is standing in their midst to challenge them. And he's challenging them, one, to judge with justice. Don't show partiality. Give justice to the weak. Maintain the right to the afflicted. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Now, whose work ordinarily in human terms is it to do this? Kings or judges? That's what's going on here. God is speaking to people with authority. People who are given the power and the mandate and the strength to discharge and render justice. And in that sense, they are mighty people, isn't it? They are strong in that sense. That's why the word El is ascribed to them here. So God is basically addressing himself to judges. He's addressing himself to judges. And these are judges who are not acting as they should. And God is acknowledging you have been given the strength, the power, the ability, the might, and you should be using that might in the interest of the people, and you're not. It is in that context that the word strength or strong one is being used. Makes sense to describe it. Now God is saying in verse 5, they have neither knowledge nor understanding. Now that's the worst thing you can say about a judge. A judge without knowledge, without understanding, hopeless. The judges walk in darkness. All the foundations of the world are shaken. Because justice is supposed to form the foundations of the world. Now when your judges are people who failed at the school of law, yeah, well, and then do you have a country? That's how we become a banana republic. So God is basically saying the world has become a banana world. Why? Because the people who are given the strength, the strong ones, the mighty ones, the judges, have no knowledge and they care nothing for justice. So God now tells himself, verse 6 now becomes relevant. I say, now God is challenging them. You are God, you are strong, but you are God, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. Now, why does God call them his sons here? Now, that's another technical way. God calls them sons because they are exercising something of God's power, isn't it? Among the people. So what they have is delegated authority of God. I have elevated you to this position whereby you exercise my authority for the people, and you have failed. You are God, you are strong. You are my sons, all of you. Nevertheless, now you will die like mere men. In other words, God is going to bring them low. He's going to be mortal. This passage doesn't call human beings gods. Okay? It is judges who are being referred to in this way. Makes sense? And so God says, arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. So that's what's going on here. So this is not a passage that is intended to say that we human beings are little gods. No. The word God here simply refers to strong ones, mighty ones, people with authority. So you can actually substitute the word God with judges. Okay? So that's what it means. And we can do this with the Exodus passage, and then you can see how this applies to the John passage. Which one? Which one? Yeah, so which attribute are you talking about? Strength. Yes. Yeah. No. God is strong, isn't it? And that is an attribute that he shares with human beings. Because human beings have strength. So it's a shareable attribute. But we don't share in the same way. But we share that attribute doesn't make us small gods. Yeah. You see how hermeneutics then becomes important? Yeah. And this, by the way, is the passage, this classic text that the prosperity preachers use to treat the little God theory. Yet it's a gross misinterpretation. Yeah. And I'm glad we dealt with this because it also demonstrates the shareability of some of these attributes and the limitations of that shareability. Yeah, so how much time do we have?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, all right. Let's see if we have another question, because if we don't, we can't open a new thing in 5 minutes. Just take a break and then come. Yes?
It's a concern now that she has brought up.
Oh, yes.
Kuhusu hiyo communicable attribute.
Yeah, yeah.
Kwa hivyo kama Mungu ametupatia nafasi kwa neema yake kuweza kuwa na nguvu.
Yeah.
Sikia vile vile umeeleza ndio ile fundisho la kuwa tunaweza ongea vitu zifanyike. Wakati mwingine
yeah. So people are attached that as well. Yeah, because we are this, therefore.
Tunaweza sema vitu na zikafanyika. Ndio utaeleza vipi mtu akasema kitu na ifanyike na sasa ichukue kuwa kweli watu wanaweza fanya kusema vitu na zikafanyika.
So then people extrapolate from all of this to say that because we share part of the qualities of God, therefore we can act in certain ways like God. Now let's answer that carefully. Because sometimes in an attempt to respond to a false teaching, we can swing to an extreme. We can. So let's say this way. God made us in his image. And what did he first do with us in terms of, if you look at what goes on in Genesis 1, Genesis 2, he gives mankind dominion. Alright? He gives mankind dominion. Dominion to do certain things, to rule the earth and so on and so on. And so we cannot deny that mankind has what we call delegated authority. Delegated authority to rule the universe. And to deny that would deny scripture itself. Having said that, we also must reckon with the fact that all authority that we have as mankind is delegated and therefore is exercised under another. Right? Exercised under another. And if it is exercised under another, the parameters of the exercise of that authority are clearly defined by that other. Okay? Yeah. So what that means then is, I don't think it's correct to say that our words are utterly useless. No, I don't think it's accurate to say that. Our words are not utterly useless. Our words are meaningful. What we say matter. I think if you read the book of Proverbs, you'll find that repeated again and again. And particularly Proverbs uses fairly strong language, says that death and life are in the power of your tongue. Meaning that our words matter. Okay? By our words we can injure and we can heal. Yeah? By our words we can cause good and we can cause harm. Yeah, so no doubt about it. But having said all of that, you've got to then ask yourself, so, is this an ability that is without limits? Now, of course it has a lot of limits. Yeah. So let me ask, for example, can I stand in the middle of nothing and declare, let there be light, and there's light? Can I do that? Can I? No, I can't. I'm looking at you because I am seeing a lot of question marks written in your face. Yeah. If I could, I would probably have decreed my own world and live in it. I mean, how many people don't have clothes here? Surely, if you could decree that, let there be a plot, and there is. Can you do that? No, you're going to have to save money. And work hard and sweat. And once you've made the money, then you go find a plot and buy. God didn't do any such thing. God wanted the universe, and it's simply spoken. I'm simply telling you that there is delegated authority. There is shared power, but it has limits. There are things we can do, there are things we can't do. And all I'm saying to you is, our words do not have mystical power to bring into existence things which are not there. Our words don't have that. Only God can do that. Yeah. But let me give you another example. This, I think, is the larger context in which these words come in the book of Proverbs. If I have a loose tongue, for example, if I have a loose tongue, I just go spewing out words carelessly, and I'm a member of a church, for instance, I just speak carelessly, speak about the pastor, speak about the other member, I mean, I hear a room and I take it all over the place. Is there a strong chance that I might actually bring that church down? Yes. There isn't. In that sense, my words are power. But are my words working mystically? No, they're not working mystically. No. Yeah, but they're accomplishing something negative in that sense. Yeah. So my words can destroy relationships. Because I can sow a bad seed in your mind and then sow another bad seed in the mind and then you two can't see eye to eye. My words can do that. What about if I'm a member of a church and in times of crisis, I take it upon myself to try and bring the sides together. And so I go there and speak a good word. Yeah, I go there and speak a good word. And maybe some people are trying to rebel against a deacon or a pastor or to, take down a believer. And I go and remind, please, do you not remember what this brother has done for our church for the last 5 years? Don't you remember? Because now you might have done something wrong, and everybody's going to see that. And now we are reminding them of how useful this brother has been, this sister has been, and are now changing their perceptions of the brother. Oh, surely, how could we not forgive our brother? He's been so fine. If I go do that here, then I do that there. Am I putting the church back together? What am I using? So in that way, my words have power, isn't it? And that's what I'm saying. We've got to clearly delineate the limits and the usefulness of our words, and in what context and parameters those words work powerfully. The misunderstanding of those verses is when someone thinks but those verses mean that our words somehow have some mystical ability, some miraculous ability to get certain things done. No, that's not what the Bible means. The book of Proverbs largely pushes the agenda, but careless talk can destroy relationships and bring down societies. That's really what is being said there. Okay? And careful, constructive talk can build relationships and put societies back together. So in that sense, are our words powerful? Of course they are. But now you cannot extrapolate from that one and then say, because I spoke good things to people, now the church has been brought back together. Now I'm going to decree and declare. No, you're mixing things up. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. So you got to understand that. So I'm trying not to be extreme in simply saying, no, our words completely don't matter. No, our words do matter. And they matter under God. Eh? Yeah. Yes, so we know. I hope that's helpful. Yes, please, if you want to.